Ohio seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to offer an amendment to the Disclose Act.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report number 111-511, offered by Mr. Kucinich of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1468, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The underlying bill would extend an existing ban on campaign contributions by government contractors to also include independent expenditures and electioneering communications by contractors. My amendment would clarify that this provision applies to companies with leases with the federal government, allowing them to drill for oil and gas in the Outer Continental Shelf. If we ever needed a stark reminder of one of the many problems that arise from our addiction to oil, we have it now. As many as 500,000 gallons of oil is erupting from an underwater volcano of oil into one of the most fragile ecosystems on Earth every single day from the Deepwater Horizon drilling site alone. This disaster was preventable. We had a warning of the consequences of our dependence on oil in the 1970s. We ignored it. We could have built upon the increased awareness to continue on a path of weaning ourselves off of oil, but we squandered it. There can be no doubt that the oil industry has strategically and brilliantly used its powerful influence to maintain or even worsen the addiction. They're not entirely to blame, though. Blame does rest with Congress for being addicted to oil company contributions. We have to begin to break the addiction and do it now. According to OpenSecrets.org, the oil and gas industry has given close to a quarter of a billion, or strike that, close to a quarter of that's right, a quarter of $1 billion to candidates and parties since the 1990 election cycle. In the 2008 cycle alone, the oil and gas industry donated $36 million. In the 2010 cycle, they're on track to exceed that with $13 million donated so far. The mere perception of undue influence by the companies whose products are so profoundly destructive to our water, air, and health is toxic to our democracy. Mr. Chairman, I'm urging a yes vote for the Kucinich amendment that relates to the Outer Continental Shelf leaseholder status. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr.
For what purpose do you rise?
To claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, here we go again, Mr. Chairman. Let's make sure this bill is unconstitutional. Why not just tear up the First Amendment right here in front of everybody so they know what we're doing? The court has said you cannot establish disfavored groups over favored groups. The gentleman has just expressed perhaps an appropriately conditioned animus towards those who are engaged in offshore drilling. So we are going to say those corporations, because they engage in offshore drilling with leases, cannot participate in the political process in the way anybody else can. Now, he doesn't do it with leases for those who are onshore. He doesn't do it for those who have mineral leases on U.S. lands. So what is the justification? The justification can't be what the gentleman just said in terms of the fragile ecological infrastructure. That's not the legal basis for which you can make a distinction. It is, why is the group that you are saying is singled out for this special treatment uniquely involved in corruption or the appearance of corruption, as opposed to all other groups similarly situated? And the gentleman, instead of arguing that point, talks about this terrible tragedy in the Gulf, about which we all agree, but then says that that is the basis for creating this distinction under the narrow allowance the Supreme Court has articulated over really 2 centuries of jurisprudence. And so what we're doing here is we're finding what disfavored group do we have today and let's treat them differently than everybody else. Not in terms of whether they can negotiate for a contract, but whether they can be involved in political speech as identified by the Supreme Court in their decision interpreting the First Amendment. Now, I realize that many on that side of the aisle love to refer to, I guess it's a movie called The Inconvenient Truth. But the true inconvenient truth in this body today is the First Amendment. The Constitution is inconvenient. There are things that you wish you could do, but you're not allowed to do. And the fact of the matter is, once again, I find it incredible that my friend from Ohio would be fearful of robust debate and rather would say, well, this is an area in which we can refuse to allow debate. I mean, that's basically what the court has said to us. They said the cure for bad speech, intemperate speech, dishonest speech, speech we don't like, is not to somehow suppress that speech, but to allow more speech, to allow greater robust debate. And that's the tragedy here. We are confined by a rule that allows very few amendments, confined by a rule that limits debate about that great Constitution, which enhances the idea of robust debate. So once again, we are seeking to have an amendment adopted here which will move in the direction of less debate rather than more debate, create favored groups versus disfavored groups, give an advantage to some over the others, rather than say let's have an equal playing field and make sure that everybody has the opportunity to be heard.
Gentleman reserves? Yes. Gentleman from Ohio.
I asked the chair how much time is remaining.
Gentleman from California has 1 minute remaining. Gentleman from Ohio has 3 minutes remaining.
Three?
3.
I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
I would let my friend from California know that there is no First Amendment right to drill for oil and gas in the Outer Continental Shelf. There is no constitutional right that anyone has to a government contract. And this provision relates to the Outer Continental Shelf leases and not all oil and gas leases, because these leases in the Outer Continental Shelf are inherently more dangerous, more risky. It's especially true, as we've seen with deepwater drilling. It's true of all drilling in the Outer Continental Shelf. These spills are impossible to clean up. We're still living with the effects of the Valdez catastrophe. We'll be living with the effects of Deepwater Horizon catastrophe for generations. We're not just talking about mopping up the shores and spreading toxic disbursement and everyone goes home happy. This oil is going to be in the water column, on the seafloor for a very long time, ramifications for our delicate ecosystem, forcing a lot of persistent toxic compounds like metals into our food supply. These oil companies could conceivably intervene in our political process using money that they're getting from leases with the federal government to place our environment at further risk.
Time is expired. Gentleman from California.